Good afternoon, everybody. Today's lesson is going to be on cell transport. Cell transport just involves talking about molecules moving across the cell membrane. If we remember from our organelle quiz, the cell membrane allows things to move in and out of the cell. It's actually a really complicated organelle, so we're going to go ahead and look a little bit more in depth at it. We'll run about 4 or 5 days worth of labs to really explore some of the different processes that we'll be talking about today. So let's go ahead and get started. So we know the cell membrane allows molecules to move in and out of a cell. That's one of the main things we've talked about. You may have seen the term selectively permeable. That's just the ability of the cell membrane to kind of pick and choose what comes in and out of the cell. So not everything can pass through the cell membrane. There's certain reasons why. Most of it's because of what the cell membrane is composed of and how it's structured. So it's made of 2 layers of lipids, and it's got several different types of protein channels and pumps, and it also has some carbohydrates in there as well. So let's go ahead and look at some of these words. Lipids are simply fats. Okay, so any type of fat is going to be a lipid, and your fats are right here. It's these structures here. So you have 2 layers, one on top and one on the bottom. Alright, proteins we've talked about before, and carbohydrates are just sugars. Alright, you can see those. There's carbohydrate chain right there. So these are your protein channels right here, and then some of these proteins are also act as pumps to help move things in and out. And the channels help things move back and forth across the membrane, and then some things go directly through the membrane itself. Alright. So we have a lot of different types of cell transport. They're broken up into 2 major categories. The first one's going to be passive transport. Anytime something's passive, it means it does not require any energy. So what this means is that the molecules are going to move across the cell membrane, and they're moved down something we call the concentration gradient. So think of it as moving downhill. Alright, so if you have, this is your concentration gradient. Okay. So think of the gradient as a hill, and the molecules are moving down. So this continues until equilibrium is reached. So if it moves down the gradient, it's going from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Alright, and concentration just means how much of something is there. So if I have, say, 8 molecules of something here and only 2 down here, we'll say 3. No, we'll say 2. Okay, so if you have 8 molecules up here and 2 down here, this has your high concentration, this has your low concentration. Passive transport means it's not going to require energy, and molecules are just going to float down to here. And this is going to continue until equilibrium is reached. And what that means is it's the same amount of molecules are on both sides of the membrane. So if your membrane comes across here, okay, you have a high concentration outside the cell and a low concentration inside the cell. To reach equilibrium, how many of these molecules would have to move down into the membrane? Okay, well, if you look and count, you have 8 here and 2 here. You realize that if these 3 were to move over here, and you add 3 to that side, you now have 5 molecules on each side. So that's equilibrium. Alright, so that's passive transport. Now we have different types of passive transport. First one's diffusion, and those are where molecules move down the concentration gradient, and that's where I was talking about, from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And that's always until equilibrium is reached. Okay, any type of passive transport we talk about always reaches equilibrium. Alright, so same amount of molecules on both sides of the membrane. So some examples from real life would be like smelling food cooking. Alright, food's getting cooked in the kitchen, it's going to travel across, and you might smell it then when you're in the family room. Okay, so that's an example of diffusion. There's a high concentration of food smell in the kitchen, and it's moving to the area of lower concentration, which would be like the family room. Same idea with spraying air freshener. You spray air freshener on one side of the room, eventually it's going to travel to the other side, because that's how diffusion works. And it works that way inside your cells as well. And we'll look in more detail at which specific molecules move in and out of the cell membrane through diffusion. So osmosis, it's the same thing as diffusion, except it's dealing with water. Okay, so water molecules are moving down the concentration gradient from an area of high concentration to low concentration, again, until equilibrium is reached. Okay, and we'll see several examples of this. We'll run some demonstrations, and you guys will create an experiment to actually look at osmosis. So we'll get a little bit more in depth with that. But this really has to do with different cells being in water. Alright, so this will really affect fish. Okay, so we'll talk about why you can't put a saltwater fish in fresh water or a freshwater fish in salt water. And it all has to do with osmosis. Same with watering plants. Why it's not good to water plants with salt water, and it's good to water them with fresh water. Okay, it's what happens to the cells. So we'll talk about that, and we'll take a look at them. Hopefully we'll be able to see some plant cells under microscopes and watch what happens. Alright, when we talk about osmosis, there are also 3 different types of solutions, or types of water, that a cell can be in. Okay, so if the cell is in something we call a hypotonic solution, that means there's less water in the surrounding area than there is inside the cell. And when we talk about less water, we don't mean amount, we mean there's less concentration of water. Alright, and this is kind of a hard concept to pick up. What we mean by that is if there's salt water outside, you have salt taking up some of the water. Okay, whereas if you have pure water inside a cell without any salt, this is the area of more concentration of water, even though there might be more water outside the cell, because the salt is there, it's not pure. Okay, so that's a little bit difficult concept, and we'll look a little bit more into that too to help explain it. Another type is a hypertonic solution. So if you were just to reverse these two, okay, that's when more water is in the surrounding environment. So outside the cell, you have pure water. Inside the cell, you would have salt water. Okay, that would be an example of a hypertonic solution. Then the last type is called isotonic, and that just means that there's equal concentrations of water inside and outside the cell. Okay, so that's when homeostasis is reached. Homeostasis, equilibrium, that's what all cells need to maintain to make sure they work the best that they possibly can. Okay. Alright, the second type of transport that we talk about is active transport. Active transport requires energy, and energy, like we learned, is created in the mitochondria. And another name for energy, the energy that's created by the mitochondria, is ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay, you will not be quizzed on this. You do not have to know this. It's just nice to know what ATP stands for. It actually stands for something. So molecules move across the cell membrane, and this time they're moving up the concentration gradient. So this time they're going uphill. Okay, so you have your hill, and this is your gradient. Okay, your cell membrane. Now you're moving up the gradient. Okay, so you will have, so instead of things falling down, now you have to move uphill. Okay, so think of it as if you're riding a bike downhill, it doesn't require energy, you don't have to pedal to go downhill. Alright, so that's passive transport, whereas active transport, you're pedaling uphill, so you have to exert energy to get up that hill. Okay, and when we talk about active transport, it does not reach equilibrium. So it just keeps going and going, and it won't stop until it decides it needs to. Alright, so we have several examples. Endocytosis is the first example. This is when molecules move into the cell, and you're moving this time from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. So again, if you have your cell membrane, and you have 8 molecules, so say we have 6 inside and we have 3 outside, they're actually going to move into the cell. So if this is outside the cell, in terms of endocytosis, these are going to move into the cell. Okay? So it's going against the concentration gradient because there's more inside the cell, so it's pushing up and it has to require energy. So there's two different types of endocytosis. Okay, if we talk about penocytosis, that means that liquid molecules are moving into the cell, and we talk about phagocytosis, we're talking about solids moving into the cell. And then the last type we have is exocytosis. Exocytosis is when molecules move out of the cell, and again from there of low concentration to high concentration. So just reverse this. Okay, so if you have your membrane, you have 6 molecules outside and you have 3 inside. Alright, exocytosis is going to push these out of the cell. Alright, if this is the outside part. Alright, so that's really all the information that you need in order to understand cell transport. We're going to actually do demonstrations in labs and a whole bunch of other stuff so you guys can actually see this stuff happening and what actually happens to cells when they're put in these different types of conditions and why it's important for them to maintain homeostasis, which is just making sure that they're balanced with their external environment. Alright, so tomorrow we're going to go ahead, I'll show you guys the cell membrane in action, and then we're going to do a little demonstration with bubbles so you can see how bubbles act like a cell membrane. Alright, so have a good night, and I will see you all in class. Alright, bye.